Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. I have a returning repeat guest today, Daniel Snyder. Daniel, welcome to the show, my friend.
All right, Tom. Always a pleasure to chat with you and your great audience about
Um,
medical affairs in whatever path it takes. Always enjoy it.
yeah,
Thank you so much
man,
for having me.
I'm excited about this one. So, guys, Daniel's been on the show before. We know each other for a long time. He brought up the idea of talking about the rise of fractional medical affairs roles in pharma. I think this is a great topic. I think you guys are gonna appreciate this. Very timely. I think you're gonna appreciate this. Before we get into a couple announcements, um, don't forget, right now is the time to sign up for Fierce Pharma Week, which is coming up September 8th through the 11th. And that's going to be in Philadelphia at the Pennsylvania Convention Center. This used to be Mass East. It's now Fierce Pharma Week. It's a bigger event that has a couple of different tracks. There's medical affairs, so obviously there's a track for you guys, and then there's a marketing and a PR and a um, BD focus as well. So go to Fierce Pharma Week, and then literally go to Google, type in Fierce Pharma Week. It'll come up. When you register, type in the code MSLTALK, and you'll get 25% off. So definitely love to see you out there. Don't miss out. It's registration is going to close up soon. So definitely check that out. And one more quick announcement. It's the second year anniversary of the Aspire MSL program so if there's any aspiring MSLs that are interested in checking out the coaching program that we have for aspiring MSLs, you definitely want to take advantage now because we're relaunching the program with a bunch of new features, a brand new chat bot or an updated Super Mira chat bot, which is going to be awesome. There's going to be a lot of new AI stuff in there, interview preparation stuff, and then the main course. So you go to mslmastery.com, and then when you get to the homepage, just click on the Aspire button. That'll give you all the information, and do it now because the price is going to increase when we relaunch it. So right now it's August. I would try to get this done before September so you could take advantage before the price goes up. All right, Daniel, let's get into it. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about fractional roles. So let's start with the definition. So what would you say is the definition, or how would you define what would be called either interim or fractional roles in medical affairs? And then how are they different from traditional full-time roles?
Yeah, Tom. So the interim, the fractional, contract-based roles, they're kind of synonymous, and they mean part-time. There's
Hmm.
very specific deliverables that are requested, and you come in as an expert if you're involved with this type of work. I personally happen to be. I'm For the first time in my career, I've been downsized a little over a year ago, and I want to stay busy as I look for a new full-time role. And I was very fortunate to have been approached by a couple of CEOs who were aware of me and knew what I was capable of, helped them out, and it's just kind of started to grow. Again, I keep looking for a new full-time job, but this is something that's keeping me busy and keeping my skills well honed and so forth. So it's to your question, it is project-based, part-time, clear deliverable or a clear period of time by which you provide your scientific, your professional, let's just say medical affairs expertise to the company. And you have, like I said, particular deliverables to provide, and you work with that organization until those deliverables are met.
Yeah.
That
You
answers
know,
your question.
and this isn't a new concept. I mean, this
No.
has been going on for many, many years. It's just what we're seeing is that the like the terminology has changed a little bit because this word fractional is it's really taken off. It's become a
Yeah,
big thing.
yeah.
Why would you say this has starting to become more popular and why the rise in fractional positions right now in pharma?
Very simply, Tom, pharma is post-COVID gone through an adjustment period,
Hmm.
a redefining moment where I think during COVID, what happened was there were the talent wasn't as abundant as it is now, and there was a lot of probably overhiring going on during that period of time. And now there's been a bit of a reckoning where pharmaceutical, biotech, medtech organizations have had to really take a hard look at their pipelines, really rationalize their business models, streamline. And then on top of it, as we're all aware of, there are some economic uncertainties, most recently from the change in administration. You have tariffs, you have cutbacks in R&D funding, you have an, a quest to become equal in terms of OUS paying for drugs as opposed to the United States paying the bulk of the development of drugs and so forth. So, as you can imagine, with that degree of uncertainty, VCs, private equity are probably looking at pharma as potentially a riskier investment. So you see these clinical stage biotech companies who are pretty confident in drumming up the requisite money that they need for their runway to develop the early phase assets and so forth, having to really think about their spend rate, their burn rate, and really rationalize how do we get the critical things that we need to get done, but to do it without the type of money that they're probably used to with other in the better times that pharma, biotech, and medtech found themselves in. So, economic headwinds in a nutshell, and then the realization that critical things need to get done. And how do we do that without a permanent hire because of the uncertainty associated with it? Can we get things done, but not take up an FTE to do that?
Right.
And as you're well aware, there's been a lot of layoffs over the last couple of years. I'm a consequence of it. First time in my over 30-year career, and a lot of my friends and colleagues have experienced this recently. And this is a really good, I call it a gig, uh, to keep things going, keep things interesting, keep busy. And this gig economy is picking up steam. So.
It's a good way to put it. And I mean, obviously, anyone listening to this is familiar with the fact that there have been lots of layoffs. They may have been affected by layoffs or know somebody that's been affected by layoffs. It's over the course of the past 2 years, pretty much unprecedented in our industry. But here's the thing, companies still need to get things done. They still have to
Yeah.
drive strategy and they still are responsible for doing business and getting things done. So how have you seen companies utilize interim and fractional talent to help drive strategy? What maybe it's post layoff or when maybe they have a bit of a deficit.
Absolutely. Well, speaking from firsthand experience, I've been brought into organizations. I've been tapped by chief development officers, CEOs, and chief medical officers who are rather forward thinking, and they realize that, okay, I need to move this program forward. I don't have the luxury of bringing in, let's just say, a head of medical affairs, but I know there are things that need to get done. We're at a critical tipping point. We're transitioning from phase one. We're gearing up to do phase two. And they have this feeling that, hey, I don't want to miss incorporating something into our next pivotal program. let's bring in somebody who's done these types of things and provide us with a consultancy so that we don't miss the boat on incorporating things that we should incorporate at this critical stage of our clinical stage of development and so forth. So I've been brought in and developed a soup to nuts strategic tactical medical affairs plan. I've also been brought in to develop an integrated evidence generation plan, and this kind of folds in very nicely into the clinical development process. And I've advised companies you might want to consider incorporating this into your protocol because it could pave the way of you building in real world evidence. And why is that important? Well, it's important at the early stages to think about the end in mind.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that you're going to, for lack of a better term, leverage when you get your clinical data, when you're in that peri-launch phase and you're starting to speak with payers? You want to have as much critical evidence, not just about your program, your asset from a clinical stage perspective and from your clinical program, but how does it compare to what's already on formulary? And that's a tough thing to do pre-PDUFA date. But there are certain things that you can incorporate into your pivotal program that would allow you to do some differentiation and so forth. And having that type of information up front in that peri-launch phase can really make a difference once you get the approval and then you launch the product and so forth. So I really applaud those forward-thinking C-suite leaders who know what they don't know, or they're very forthright and honest and say, I think there's probably things we should think about. And you bring in a seasoned expert who's done all these things, and you get some critical perspective before you lock and load into your clinical program. So hopefully, does that give you some perspective on that question, Tom?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I actually have so many questions because there's so much nuance to this. So like people that are listening right now that are in transition and considering their next move, interviewing for positions. Um, should they, and how would this be a good idea or an opportunity to bridge the gap, considering something fractional or interim? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So it's a tough market out there, let's all be honest. And there's so much talent out there as a consequence, as you pointed out, with the downsizing and the layoffs and so forth. So there's very few opportunities and there's a lot of talent out there. But given the economic uncertainty, it provides opportunity for those who are willing to leverage their network and to do the requisite research to find those types of companies who may benefit from their experience and so forth. So it really, for those individuals who are willing to kind of shift gears and still remain in the game, but do it slightly differently as opposed to working for a company and taking more of an entrepreneurial spirit to it, it can be it can be refreshing. It's a bit daunting, quite frankly, from a business development perspective, but being able to still work within medical affairs and provide solutions to companies can be very gratifying. And I have a number of colleagues who still haven't landed a new full-time position who are starting to, dip their toe into this consulting, this fractional, this interim, this contract-based work. And it's kind of opening their eyes to the possibilities. It's keeping them busy. It's extending their network, and they're able to establish a track record of providing these deliverables, which they can work into the interview process as they continue to look for another full-time job. I know it's for me personally, it's opened up a whole new therapeutic area for
Mm,
me. And I'm leveraging that in my interviews for
yeah.
full-time positions because then it broadens the opportunity for a particular um, uh, position that I otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity to apply for because of the specificity of the job description. You know, nowadays with all these uh, uh, very talented folks out there, companies are in the position of getting very specific about what they want from a prior experience for a new position that needs to be filled and so forth. So having the latitude to work for a company in a fractional basis and provide value to that company has the potential to expand your therapeutic expertise. And
Well,
I've benefited from that.
I mean, it's also a resume builder. I
Yes,
mean, this
absolutely.
is this is a way to bridge a gap. You kind of, if you can find a way to fill your resume and bridge a gap from one position to the next, and maybe it's a couple of interim projects that you string together to show that you're doing some quote unquote contractual project-based work. That always is more appealing than just having a gap. You're gaining new contacts, probably, right? Because you're interacting, acting with new people. You may be, like you said, you may be gaining experience in a new therapeutic area or building on an existing expertise in a certain therapeutic area. So for the individual, I think there's a lot of advantages to considering doing this. Um, what would you say are the advantages for companies to consider doing these fractional type of projects?
So, one point before I address that question, and you made me think of it as you were describing that, is that it it gives you as the potential candidate another solution to provide the company in
Hmm.
that, okay, they're looking for a full-time uh, individual, but maybe you don't know exactly what all the conditions of that full-time position. Maybe it's a company exploring the possibility of a full-time position, and then they see in your resume, to your point, that you've added your consultancy. Maybe you've established an LLC
Hmm.
uh, as a corporate entity
Hmm.
by which to do this consultancy, and maybe it will broaden the discussion during the interview of, hey, maybe we, instead of a full-time job, maybe we bring you in a part-time capacity and see how it works out before we lock and load into a full-time equivalent. It broadens the company's perspective on how they're going to get the work done. It may not require a full-time equivalent, even though you're in the interview to have the possibility of this turning into a full-time job. So back to your question, what are the advantages to the company? I think first and foremost, it's a cost-effective measure for very specific project-based work. So maybe the company's at a critical stage and they
Hmm.
know they need to get something done. This would traditionally be something that a medical director would do, or maybe a head of medical affairs, but they're not quite ready to pull the trigger on bringing in somebody at that level and so forth. But they know they need to get certain things done. This could be a very, very good cost-effective way of making sure that those things, those critical milestone things in the evolution of the company get done without actually committing to a full-time equivalent. So I think that's probably what's driving a lot of this. And I think if you look at the current trend, there's been about a 300% increase in the use of fractional interim contract-based expertise in the pharmaceutical, biotech, and medtech arena over the last couple of years.
Hmm.
I recall seeing some of those statistics to that effect. And I think companies, because they're limited runway, I read somewhere that 40% of clinical stage companies have less than a year of funding.
Mm,
So you companies who start out, they do an IPO, they typically, find a suite, they start building out the C-suite, and then they start building the infrastructure from a talent perspective, and then they start doing the critical work and so forth. I think a lot of senior management, CEOs and so forth are thinking, how can we do it with less commitment to full-time equivalents, less people? How can we keep the process moving without really, you know, weighing ourselves down, for lack of a better way of describing it, with the full complement of the talent that you would typically have when you start a company? Can we do it in an interim fashion? I'm working with an oncology company whose business model is really focused on delivering very specific technical recommendations on drug design for big pharma, but they're also concurrently trying to develop their own drug. So what are they doing? And I think it's brilliant. This concurrent first time drug development, they're all interim consultants, fractional experts, whether it's an interim CMO, interim head of medical affairs, that's the role I play, interim translational medicine, interim regulatory, and so forth. So they have this whole kind of interim part of the company that's concurrently in tandem to all the other things that they're doing, developing this drug in parallel. And I think it's a really cost-effective way of continuing to evolve the company and potentially seeing if they can go off on their own.
yep. Couple things to unpack. Kind of a scary statistic. 40% of companies are
Yeah.
operating with less than a year of capital. Definitely scary statistic. I'm going to make a statement. I think that's going to change. I think that there's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines,
Oh, there is.
tons of money
Completely.
sitting on the sidelines. I think that we should see that start to come from the sidelines onto the playing field, and there's going to be a lot more opportunity coming up. Why do I say that? Because what goes up must come down and vice versa. The money's
Everything
been
is
sitting on the
cyclical.
sidelines for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
And I know that there was uncertainty with the election and, what's Trump going to do and, what's going to happen with these tariffs. And I know that there's been a lot of uncertainty, but as the stock market continues to go up and if interest rates finally come down, if there's other factors that maybe play into things, I know that I don't want to get into a political conversation because there's obviously a lot of uncertainty still. But I do think that at some point, these investors are going to say, I need to get back into this biotech market. Um, we talked about advantages of these fractional projects, both for individuals and for companies. The one thing I want to point out as far as a disadvantage for the individual is that when you're looking for your next job, let's say you ultimately want a full-time position, and you say, well, I'll take an interim. I'll take a 3-month gig. I'll take a 6-month gig. The only thing that I really want to caution you about is that as you continue to interview for other positions, there's that timing factor.
Hmm.
You're trying to put the pieces together so that you transition from the fractional or the interim over to the new job, which could be full time. But once you commit to doing a 3-month fractional like project, it's kind of hard to just back out on it without burning a lot of bridges. I mean, I guess you can be transparent with the person and saying, "Hey, I'm available. I want to
Hmm.
do this, but I'm also interviewing." So that's one thing. The other thing is you just have to maybe consider in the interview process, find out if they would be willing to accept a longer start date. So let's just say you get in through the final stages and and you say, um, or even in the beginning stages, would you be comfortable if I start in 2 months when I finish this assignment? Then at least you know up front and you communicate that. What would
Absolutely.
you say disadvantages or maybe the downsides for companies to go this route?
Well, I think the downsize is you're not fully committing to someone. And
Mm,
I actually, the more I think about it, Tom, I think there's a lot more upside for
okay.
the company. Uh, the reason I'm saying that is in the companies that I've done this for, there's always been an upfront discussion. This could turn into a full-time
Right.
position, right? If all the conditions are right, if we get the next series of funding, if everything moves forward, if you obviously deliver the goods and we're happy with working with you and what you do and so forth and so on, um, it could lead to a full-time job. So I really think there's tremendous upside. What happens, and I know this firsthand, is you bring in this fractional interim person, and you're kind of isolated to a certain extent because the rest of the organization looks at you're a contractor and they're not making a full investment in getting to know you and so forth and so on. So you're part of the team, but you're not fully part of the team and so forth. And I deal with ambiguity. I'm very autonomous and so forth and so on. So that doesn't phase me and so forth. But then you're not able to translate the institutional knowledge to the individual because there just oftentimes is not enough time. And the onboarding process is typically truncated and so forth and so on. So you're not as an organization getting the full capabilities of the individual because you're keeping that individual really focused on the deliverable and so forth. So you probably are not getting everything that that individual could bring to the table because you're keeping it very project specific. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Like when you're looking at I'm just curious in your experience and from what you've seen out there, is this lucrative from a compensation standpoint? What should people expect? Should they expect that because it's interim and it's shorter term, that there's more money to be made in that short period of time? Is there less money to be made? Like how should somebody view the compensation piece to this?
Like everything in life, Tom, it depends,
Okay. All
right?
right.
And you need to be flexible. Now, I think it's really important to figure out what your value is.
Okay.
And it's a simple way of doing that. Figure out what your last full-time position, base pay, bonus, equity, fringe benefits, roll that all in, figure out an hourly rate. That's a very simple thing to do. I think it's important to communicate your value, especially when you're doing very strategic things or you're advising on protocol design and so forth and so on. But here's the thing, Tom, you need to be very flexible in terms of what the company is able to offer you. Now, oftentimes I will get what my target hourly rate is, but other times I may need to take equity, right? Because the company doesn't have the full cash coffer at its disposal and so forth. And that's
Yep.
fine. You just work that into the contract, or it may be a retainer based type of situation. Or maybe it's a very nominal hourly rate with a carrot at the end, depending on the outcome of the deliverable and so forth. So it goes from A to Z. You need to be very flexible. I think it's really important to to network with other consultants to find out what they are charging, especially if you're in the same particular area. Like, hey, what's the range at which you operate for a particular deliverable? Say it's a strategic tactical plan for medical affairs. What do you typically charge and so forth?
Hmm.
You just need to be very flexible, but really define what you're worth. Go into that initial discussion, the contract negotiation discussion with that, and you kind of tease out how comfortable they are with
Hmm.
that. If they agree with that in the value, if you have the bandwidth to do this, maybe it's instead of hourly, you do it on a daily basis, or you do it as a project basis, as a lump sum, and so forth. And you take an upfront amount, and then you invoice at the end of the project, and so forth. So it's all these different factors need to
Yeah.
be considered, and it's really important to be flexible with it. And very simply, maybe taking less on an hourly rate may lead to the next project
Right.
where you can justify a higher hourly rate, and they see what you're capable of, and they see the value that you bring to the organization.
Yeah.
And your value can increase as they get comfortable with you and they actually obtain the value that you bring from your first working with them.
It makes me think too. I know I'm going to get this question, so I'm going to get ahead of it right now and try to answer it. People are going to say, what do I do if someone asks me what my rate is? Or what do I do if I don't want to give my rate and I want to kind of see what they're offering before because we get this all the time. And one of the things I would recommend, so guys, if you're in that situation, what I would recommend, there's one question that you can ask that I think will help. Hopefully, they'll give you the answer because I don't always give you the answer. But if you say, help me to better understand your budget, help me to better understand your budget, hopefully, they'll give you an understanding of what their numbers are and how you might fit into it,
Yeah.
as opposed to you saying, I make X amount of dollars an hour, or I need this much a month, or this much a week, or whatever it is. Um, do you see this continuing? Do you see this getting more popular? Is this a flash in the pan? So, how do you look at fractional staffing, you know, over the course of the next, several years?
You look at the trajectory of things over the last couple of years. I indicated earlier that there's been a 300% increase. And it only takes two data points to define a trend. If you
Hmm.
have more than two, it gets tighter and you're more confident in what that trend is actually going to predict and so forth. I think there's always going to be a place for this. I think it's especially getting a lot of attention right now because of the budgetary constraints a lot of companies are in, and they know that things need to get done. So they're being rather resourceful and strategic with the way they're spending their money and so forth. So I think it'll always be there. To your point earlier, at some point the pendulum will swing back, but I think this is kind of a learning process for pharma and biotech and medtech right now. Um, I've heard this phrase, it's kind of an old phrase, the salad days, which implies when everything is going swimmingly well, money is not an issue. Uh, the future's so bright, we got to wear shades. Farm is where a lot of investors, despite the risks, they're putting their money and so forth. Well, that's not currently the case right now. If you look at big pharma right now, there's a lot of acquisition, or not a lot, not nearly as many as there have been in the past. And the type of acquisitions have been rather late stage, which means just like the investors, pharma is looking for high probability of success and so forth. So I think these clinical stage companies have to figure out a cost-effective way of getting to data disclosure that will make them enticing to investors if they're publicly traded or big pharma who may be looking at it as an acquisition and so forth. Investors want to be assured that there's a strong probability that they're going to make it through and get the approval and have a differentiated product and so forth. And a lot of executive management CEOs are trying to figure out how to do this with less money. So,
Mhm.
to your question, I actually think it's actually going to become more prominent or more prevalent with pharma, biotech, and med tech because they're realizing that they're continuing to move things forward, but in a more cost-effective way. The days of building out the team and then setting about getting the work done, I think people are going to look back and going, that's a heavy spend. I think we can do this more cost effectively. So my prediction is that it's going to gradually keep notching up because there's a lot of talent out there. There's a lot of expertise. It's the gig economy of late, and I think companies are going to see this as a way of expanding their pipeline without making significant talent investments, at least initially until they become commercialized. That's my prediction.
You heard it here first, folks. Daniel, thank you so much for sharing these insights. I think, you know what? It's so funny. It's like you hear that term gig economy. That's what this is. That these
It is a gig
fractional
economy.
positions, they're
Yeah.
gigs.
The gigs.
So
Yeah.
it just goes to show that it is the thing. And it's probably not going anywhere anytime soon. I think that this is going to stick around for a while. I agree. I agree with your prediction. So, Daniel, thank you for joining us. As always, you're the man. Appreciate all your great pearls of wisdom.
Thank you so much, Tom. Always a pleasure to talk to you and your audience. And I look for our next opportunity to have a chat.
Yeah,
So thank
man.
you.
And guys, as always, thank you for joining us. And if you got value in this, please share the show. Comment on LinkedIn if you see some stuff out there. And love you guys. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Tom.